Well, good evening and welcome. So grateful to have you all joining us tonight. You are at a church, but this is not going to be a church service. We're really excited for kind of the different format of the evening. Pray that many of you have come with questions. They're not even screened, and so we're putting you on the spot, whatever you have. So tonight, we get the privilege and honor of getting to hear from Dr. Frank Turek, author of several books that have had a great impact on my life, someone I've been following for many years. And so he's going to give a presentation, and then immediately following that, we're going to open up, and we have a mic right over here, and then we even have some seats reserved along the aisle. If you want to ask questions, you can come and sit in those seats, and we'll take turns getting you up here. But thank you guys for joining us tonight. And without further ado, let's get the evening started. Please welcome Dr. Frank Turek.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, how many of you were here this morning or were somewhere else at the time? All right, how many of you are here now? All right, how many don't respond to surveys? Don't respond to surveys. No, how many were not here this morning for either service? Where were you? I can't go through everything we've already covered. Let me give you a short overview of what we covered this morning to bring you slackers up to speed as to what we covered. We started this morning talking about Michael Monsoor, a United States Navy SEAL, who literally dove on a grenade to save his two buddies. He died just 30 minutes after doing that. And the United States Navy actually named a ship after him, the USS Michael Monsoor. He did this in 2006. He sacrificed himself to save his friends. And as we said, there's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends. That's what Jesus of Nazareth said before he went to the cross. So the question was, Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his friends. Would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And we said this morning that someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's an invented story because religious people wrote it down, and we know religious people tend to invent things. We also said it has miracles in it. We don't believe in miracles anymore. We asked the question, has anyone in here seen a resurrection? Nobody raised their hand. And yet for Christianity to be true, we all have to believe in a resurrection. How rational is it to believe in something that none of us have ever seen? And then I said, well, I think it's pretty easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions to show that it's true. These are the 4. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament true? And we talked about this morning why these are the important questions. And we also covered a little bit about question number 1. Does truth exist? And we started off with Jack Nicholson. You remember? And we asked the question, let's see if you guys can get it right this time. When Tom Cruise asked him, I want the truth, Nicholson said, yeah. That was way better. You remember this morning how wimpy you all were? Here's how he really said it.
The truth. You can't handle the truth.
And we said there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative. And we said this morning that when people make statements like that, you need to turn the claim on itself. So if someone says something like there is no truth, you're going to turn the claim on itself and say, is that true? What's up with the Afghan in the corner of the screen? Anyway, this is a self-defeating statement. Can everyone see that this is a self-defeating statement? This is like saying I can't speak a word in English to say there's no truth, because it's actually claiming it's true that there's no truth, and we say what we need to do is turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. We went through a whole bunch of other statements this morning, like there are no absolutes. Are you absolutely sure? All truth is relative. Is that a relative truth? We covered all truth comes from science. Is that a scientific truth? No. We covered you ought not judge. Remember, people say you ought not judge. Well, that's a judgment, and Jesus never just said well, you ought not judge. He told us not to judge hypocritically. So we pointed out that truth does exist this morning. And then we said, okay, let's move on to the next question. Is it true that God exists? Is it true that God exists? So we're going to pick it up right there. Now, before we get there, let me just say one thing. If our reasoning this morning was good, that there is truth, that means that relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. That's like saying I can't speak a word in English, as we already pointed out. So truth does exist. Now we want to see, is it true that God exists? Okay, so that was the summary of what we did this morning. This is now all new material. You guys ready to go? Yeah. All right. We said that there are three arguments for the existence of God, a being beyond the world who created the world and sustains the world. And here are the three we're going to look at briefly. The first argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. And cosmological just comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument, which we'll look at, is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose, and it says that there's design in the universe and design in life, you and me, then there has to be a designer. Now, there's scientific evidence behind these arguments. We'll see a little bit of that here tonight. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument we've all intuitively understood since we were very small children, and it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says that there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. Just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. Well, we know murder and torturing babies is not just a matter of opinion. It's really wrong to do that. If that's the case, then there must be a standard outside of us that we're obligated to obey, and that would be what we call God's nature. If God doesn't exist, everything's a matter of opinion. We'll get to that argument later. We still got the Afghan up there. That's Aladdin's carpet. Just think of that right there. All right? But we got to start right here at the first argument, the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming out here tonight just to see God do that. Huh? Some of you have said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Look at that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some people in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 4 years ago. He was an atheist, you may know, and he also had ALS. Hawking was kind of a medical miracle. Normally, ALS would kill you in a couple of years. This guy lived for more than 40 years with it. Anyway, here's what Hawking said. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data, that space, time, and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing, out of non-being. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. No space, no matter, no time, and then it all came into existence. Agnostic astronomer Alexander Vilenkin, who teaches at Tufts University, originally from Russia, in his book from 2006, put it this way. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? Cosmologist studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there's two interesting words in this quote from him. The first word is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science is tentative. New information can come in and overturn the theory, right? But Vilenkin thinks there's so many lines of evidence that converge on the idea that the universe had a beginning that he's saying it's a proof. Also, he says it's a problem that there's a cosmic beginning. Why is it a problem if there's a cosmic beginning? Because if all of nature had a beginning, whatever created nature can't be made of nature. It must be something beyond nature, something what we would call supernature, beyond the natural. And scientists don't want to go there. They want everything to be caused by natural laws, but natural laws themselves were created and sustained. Now, we're not going to go through the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number three, it's not controversial. Even the atheists are admitting that space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing. So now our only question is, what caused that? So let's just jump to the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone, right? I was at Texas A&M probably 15 years ago. I put this slide up, and an atheist said, "Oh, I think number one is more reasonable." I said, time out. Let's look at number two for a second. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. To say that things can pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. And some atheists are trying to say that. Like Lawrence Krauss, who used to teach at Arizona State University. He wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing. As an atheist, he's trying to figure out how the universe can come into existence out of nothing by nothing. And he failed in the book, trust me. I talk about it in the book Stealing from God, which is on the table out there. In any event, it seems completely ridiculous to say that the whole universe could pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. In fact, I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause, because you can't go on an infinite regress of causes. There has to be an uncaused first cause. There has to be something that has always existed. It's either the universe or something outside the universe, right? So I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. There is nobody sitting here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared in your dorm room out of nothing and is currently pooping on your pillow, right? I mean, you're not worried about that. You're not worried that a raging Bengal tiger is just going to appear in here out of nothing by nothing and start devouring people, because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. And if the whole universe could do so, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? You wake up one morning, you look in the driveway, your Hyundai is a Tesla. How do I charge this thing, right? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Could have saved me $4,000. If you're hungry after this little seminar here tonight and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your kitchen, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? No, it seems to me the atheists have all the faith. The Christians have someone to create the universe out of nothing. The atheists have no one. By the way, notice that everyone believes in at least one miracle. Christians believe in more than one, but we certainly believe in this one, that someone created something out of nothing. Atheists believe that no one created something out of nothing. Which takes more faith? They're believing in a miracle. Everyone believes in at least one miracle. In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Or you could say it this way. If there is no God, why does anything exist? Now think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. If space-time and matter really had a beginning out of nothing, which most people agree with, it did, whatever created space-time and matter can't be made of space-time and matter, right? Whatever the cause is must transcend space-time and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Impersonal forces can't decide to do anything. The being would also have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. Now, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, Frank, how do you know it's the Christian God? We don't. Yet. We haven't done enough research. This could be Allah or some other theistic being. You need more evidence. No argument gets you all the way to Christianity. You need to put all the arguments together. But you get those 6 attributes of what appears to be someone who could be the God of the Bible. If we keep going through the evidence and we get to all the way to point 4, which we'll do here a little bit later, we'll see that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,988 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. But we haven't gotten there yet. Now, there's a lot more in the book on that argument, but we got to move on to the next argument, the teleological argument. We're going to spend most of our time on this argument because I think it's the most interesting one. And there's 2 aspects to it. The universe appears to be designed, and you appear to be designed, life. Let's start with the universe first. We just saw it exploded into being out of nothing. In recent decades, scientists have discovered that the universe is fine-tuned. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors virtually imperceptibly about our universe, either the universe wouldn't exist or it would exist, but it couldn't support life. And some of these parameters are so finely tuned that if you just change them slightly, nothing would exist, or no universe-supporting life would exist. Let's start with Stephen Hawking, again an atheist, who put it this way. He said, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If you were to change the expansion rate, that infinitesimal amount from the very beginning, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary explanation for this. You can't say that the expansion rate evolved to this point by chance, whatever that means. Why? Because this is the initial expansion rate. It started there. It seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that made the expansion rate precisely what it needed to be. That if it were any different, nothing here would exist. Now, it's not just the expansion rate. Right now, the gravitational force is fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 40th power. 1 in 10 to the 40th power. We would not exist if that gravitational force were any different. Now, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. You want my good side? How about this? All right. Let me give you an illustration of 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. You can't get that tape measure at Lowe's, okay? Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches, but this is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If the strength of gravity were different by 1 inch in either direction across the scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40th precision. I don't have enough faith to believe that that value just landed there by chance. And oh, by the way, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. You know what scientists mean when they use the word chance? What they mean is, we don't know. Chance doesn't do a thing. Now, there's a dozen or so of these very finely tuned factors about our universe. Change any one of them, we're not here. Look, that factor right there could only be where it is for one of two reasons. It was designed to be there, or it wasn't. What's more reasonable? Somebody designed it to be right where it is. Now, it's not just our universe that appears to be designed. Our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. Let's take a look at our solar system here for a minute. Here's our solar system, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away from the sun, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is... That's a lie. It's too cold here in the winter. I'm freezing here. I came from North Carolina. I'm going back there tomorrow to warm up. What's going on? The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? Because Jupiter's gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. If Jupiter wasn't there, we would be bombarded with comets and space junk. In fact, you want to see a close-up look at Jupiter? You see these dark marks here? Those dark marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Same thing is true with Saturn. In fact, you want to take a look at the planets here? Look, check this out. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. All right, take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus right here. That's another star in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right? All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here, next to Regal. That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. Not outside our galaxy, in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here. Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas and a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our 3 sons out to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get to go to Tucson, if you go south of the city, over the hill there, they have this museum that you can go to at night. If you're out there at night, on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there one night, and the guide says, must be 20 years ago. The guide goes, well, it's so clear tonight. If we look up at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking out of the western desert sky relative to us about like this. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it, and when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Forget it. Next nearest star, forget it. Who'd like to go to the next nearest star? We'll go. Get in, kids. Are we almost there yet, Dad? Another 200,000 years. Play some more Xbox. There's no way we're going to get to another planet. Not at our current technology. It's too far and it's too dangerous. Another planet, another star system with another planet. We can get to Mars maybe, but let's suppose we figure it out somehow. Let's suppose we figure out quadruple warp speed and we get to another planet. What I'm about to show you is a little bit disturbing, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Suppose we get to another planet, we plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that video, and she smiled just a little bit, and she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Now, just how many stars are out there? Well, first of all, before we get there, here's what the psalmist says. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those that fear him. Well, how high are the heavens above the earth? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope has helped us discover that. A number of years ago, they took the Hubble Space Telescope and they trained it on 1/24 millionth of the sky. What's 1/24 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/24 millionth of the sky. And they trained the Hubble on that for a number of days, and I'm going to show you what they found. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this little composite video they put together of what they found you can see online. And I don't know if you can see this on the screen here, but along the bottom, below the Afghan, is mountains right here. Okay, this is the southern hemisphere right here. That's the southern sky. I'm going to show you what they found, and as soon as I start this little video, you're going to see the constellations come up, and then Hubble Ultra Deep Field is going to zoom in on 1/24 millionth of the sky. There is no audio. It's just a bunch of pictures put together. Are you guys ready? All right, here we go. Here's what Hubble found. There's the constellations. Now let's zoom in on 1/24 millionth of the sky. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/24 millionth of the sky, each with billions of stars in them. How many stars are there in the whole universe? If there's billions of stars in 1/24 millionth of the sky, thousands of galaxies and billions of stars. Researchers at the University of Hawaii think they figured it out. The number of stars in the universe is about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star just inside our galaxy, going 5 miles a second, will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know what the Bible means by the heavens declare the glory of God. See, everything in our experience is finite, it's limited, but the heavens appear to us to be infinite, meaning unlimited. You know what this means? I don't ever want to hear any person from this church ever use the word awesome ever again unless you're talking about God or the heavens. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome TikTok vid. No! We've totally destroyed the language. If everything's awesome, nothing is. By the way, that passage I had up there a minute ago has a completion to it. It says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those that fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us." God, if he's an ounce of any attribute, he's infinite in that attribute. If he's an ounce of love, he's infinite love. If he's an ounce of justice, he's infinite justice. That's why Jesus is the only way, by the way. Because he's infinitely just and also infinitely loving. So he can't allow injustice to go unpunished. So what does he do? He punishes himself instead. Now, when you think about the number of stars out there equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and to go from one sand grain to another sand grain going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Does that make you feel insignificant? Yeah, it shouldn't, though. Why? Because the heavens aren't made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, let's take a look at you. We just saw that the universe is designed. Are you designed? This right here is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? It's human. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. Okay? When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. and you won. That's right. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter genome, we call your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order. And your mother's egg, which was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, contained the other half of the genome, the 3.2 billion letter genome that we call your DNA. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from that point until right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separated 2-year-olds from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. Amen. You say, wait a minute, Frank. Come on, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This goes back to our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law which doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? In fact, when people say, don't legislate your morality or don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? And if we're not supposed to impose ought-nots, why are you imposing your morality on me right now? Why are you telling me I ought not do something? That's exactly what you're doing to me right now. Actually, there's a better answer for this. When somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, I say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men. And the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. Everybody knows this morality, but not everybody likes it. And if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon his nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point until right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place inside of you. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second, for most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. How do they know how to do this? Nobody knows. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million. Knock it off. Are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, time out, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle recognized something 2,400 years ago. He didn't know anything about blood cells, obviously, but he did notice that all of nature is going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. Yet it reliably goes in a direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, yet it reliably goes in a direction, There must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That all of nature's going in a direction. It's going toward a target. It's going toward what he called a final cause. It's aiming somewhere. If nature doesn't have a mind of its own, there must be somebody directing it. That's what we mean by God. Now notice, this argument is not an argument for a Big Bang cause way back when. That was the first argument. This is an argument that says you need a being like God every single second the universe exists. In fact, Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal. But he said you'd still need an unmoved mover to keep everything going. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing the music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music as long as it played the music, right? What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music's over. Same thing is true with God. God creates the universe, and he creates the natural laws that keep it going. He creates you, and then he sustains the natural laws and you every single second you exist. This is why the Apostle Paul could come along and say, in him, in Jesus, we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. So he doesn't just create and then leaves it. He creates and he sustains it. Now, there's a lot more on that argument in the book Stealing from God. But we have to move on to our final argument for God. And that is the moral argument. Let me ask you guys a question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing an interception? How do you know that? This is the interactive portion of the program. Not just the score, not just the rules. You have to know the purpose of the game, right? If there's no purpose to the game, you can't say a touchdown is better than an interception. Because you can't see if the touchdown's getting you closer to the purpose or the goal of the game, and you can't see that the interception is taking you further away. You need to have a purpose. Now, notice in football that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the players show up on the field, they don't make up the rules. The rules are already in place. The field's already set. The commissioner and the owners have set the rules up, and every time, they tweak them a little bit every year. And the players just get on that field and they play. Based on the purpose, they know what a good play is and they know what a bad play is. Now, in football, the rules are arbitrary. They could be different, but in life, the rules are not arbitrary. You can't know whether a right way to live is better than another way to live unless there's a purpose to life. If there's no God, there's no purpose. Loving people is not qualitatively better in an objective way than killing them if there's no God, because there's no purpose. You have to have purpose. Without purpose, you can't see that this is getting you closer to a purpose that doesn't exist, and this way of living is taking you further away. In fact, if there is no God, then the Nazis were not wrong. Why? In fact, what happened at Nuremberg when Nuremberg was the trial we brought the Nazi criminals to right after World War II, and we said, you committed immoral acts, and what did they say? We were just following orders. And we said, you have a moral obligation to disobey immoral orders from your government because there's a standard beyond your government. What's that standard? That standard is what's known as international law. Thomas Jefferson called it nature's law. That's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law. What they're all saying is God's nature is the standard. Any deviation from that is what we would call evil. That's how the Allies could tell the Nazis, you were wrong, because there's a standard beyond both our governments. and you violated that standard. If there's no standard, you can't say the Nazis were wrong. Now, I had a debate a number of years ago with a Jewish atheist by the name of David Silverman. You can go to our YouTube channel and see it. And I kept asking him questions about this, and he finally admitted, according to his worldview, the Holocaust wasn't really wrong. And I said, if your worldview is telling you that the Holocaust wasn't really wrong, you have the wrong worldview. Don't abandon your basic intuition that the Holocaust was wrong. Abandon atheism. If there is no God, then love is no better than rape. Not in an objective way. You might like love better, but if there's no purpose, you can't say that love is better than rape. It's just your opinion. If there is no God, then there are no human rights. You know, our country is always talking about, I have a right to this, I have a right to that. Do you realize if there's no God, there's no right to anything? There's not only no right to so-called same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There's not only no right to an abortion, there's no right to life if there's no God. Your government doesn't give you rights, as our Declaration of Independence rightly says. Governments secure rights that you already have. And if the government doesn't do that, Jefferson said, we need a new government. If there is no God, slavery and racism aren't wrong. There's a lot of people in the public square today who are atheists, who are against slavery and racism. I'm glad they're against slavery and racism, but they have no way of justifying that. That's just your opinion if there's no God. By the way, the answer to any such racism is the gospel. There's only one race, the human race. And we're all one in Christ, according to Paul. Galatians chapter 3. If there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. By the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? No. Tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Christians are commanded to love, which says reach out and help them. And if you're truly going to love somebody, you can't tolerate evil they want to do. In fact, let me ask you guys this. How many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? All right, good. That's everybody. Question. If your parents tolerate everything that you wanted to do as a kid, were they loving? No. No. If a parent tolerates everything his or her kid wants to do, she's not loving. She's unloving. If you truly want to love somebody, you will protect them. And that means standing in the way of evil. You know, in the passage that everyone reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys? 1 Corinthians 13, the love passage, Paul says, love always protects. Love rejoices in the truth. How do you do that? Love always perseveres. You tell people the truth. I don't know if you know who Thomas Sowell is. Thomas Sowell is a 91-year-old economist, grew up in Harlem, and then taught at some of the most amazing universities in our country. He recently said this. He said, when you tell people what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. Why do we tell people what they want to hear? Because we don't want them getting mad at us. So what are we doing? We're helping ourselves. We're not really helping them. We're not sacrificing ourselves to help them. We're sacrificing them to help us. Because we don't want to stand for truth. We just want to applaud them as they go off the cliff. If there is no God, then we can't complain about the problem of evil. Why? Because unless God exists, there's no such thing as evil. What? How can that be? Well, C.S. Lewis, I don't think I told you guys this yet. Has anyone in here seen the new C.S. Lewis movie? You haven't seen it? Most Reluctant Convert? Just came out in theaters Wednesday. My friend Max McLean stars in it. And he's done a one-man play around the country on C.S. Lewis. Now it's a movie. I just saw it the other day. Excellent movie. Go to cslewismovie.com. It's only running in theaters until November 18th. And I'm sure it's somewhere in this area. cslewismovie.com. Anyway, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, was an atheist. He went through World War I and he said, look, there can't be a good God. There's too much evil in the world. There's too much injustice in the world. And later on, he had an epiphany. And he ultimately wrote that epiphany in the book Mere Christianity. And here's what he wrote. He said, as an atheist, My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Well, where does justice come from? Justice is God's nature. If God doesn't exist, there's no such thing as justice, which means there's no such thing as evil. You see, evil does not exist on its own. Evil only exists as a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got nothing. You got a rust spot on the pavement. A totally moth-eaten garment is a hanger, right? It doesn't exist anymore. In other words, evil can only exist as a parasite in a good thing. So if you're going to say something's evil, you're presupposing something's good. But if you're presupposing something's good, now you're suddenly back to presupposing God. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there were good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, then God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. If evil exists, then God exists. Now, we can ask questions as why God allows certain evils. We can maybe do that during the Q&A. But to say that evil disproves God is a non-starter. Evil actually shows God does exist. Also, let's go back to football for a minute. What does the word submit mean? Nobody likes this word. Nobody likes it. So let's break it up. What does submission mean? Well, first of all, what does mission mean? There's a goal, right? We have a goal. And sub means I'm putting myself and my abilities on that goal or under that goal. I want to help achieve that goal. Okay? So if I'm a diva receiver on some team and I keep telling the coach, hey man, you got to keep throwing me the ball. And the coach says, man, if we keep throwing you the ball, we're not going to win. We got to spread the ball around, then we'll win. And then if I go, you know what, coach, you're right. I'm going to submit my will to yours because I want the team to win. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a good thing. I'm going to submit my personal goals to the overall goal of the team. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if God exists, and he does, we would be foolish to not submit to his goals. We would be foolish. We have our own little direction we want to go in life, and we're just going to become worm food one day, and we think that's more important than the eternal mission that God has given us? We're foolish if we want to go this way and God says, no, go this way. Submission is a good thing. That's how anything gets done, especially in eternity. Now, what can we conclude from these three arguments? Well, from these three arguments, we can conclude we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. And we haven't even opened the Bible yet. You don't need the Bible to know that God exists. You can see that God can exist just from these three arguments, and there's a bunch of other arguments too that'll get you to this point. But how do we know it's the Christian God? We'll get there in a minute. But some of you are probably thinking, well, Frank, atheists have reasons to be against these arguments. They might try and give reasons, but they're not good ones. Why? Because they can't even explain where reason itself comes from. And I can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis, so let me just show you what he said. This is a 2-slide quote. Track Lewis on what he says about atheists and reason, because most atheists are materialists. that we're just molecular machines, and they believe that we evolved without any purpose at all. So here's what Lewis says to that. Here's what he says. Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? You with him so far? Okay, good. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. How can you improve that? You can't. Look, we all know we can think. That's an effect. So we ought to reason back to a cause, a mind. There's a great mind that gave us the ability to think and has created this orderly world which allows us to discover cause and effect relationships. Atheists deny all this. What they're doing is they're stealing from God while they're arguing against him. They're trying to say they have reasons God doesn't exist. Well, where does reason come from? Why should we even be able to think anything and understand truths about the world outside of our skulls? Because we were designed to do that. So, how are we going to discover who is the true God? What we're going to do is go to question 3, are miracles possible? Now, this is the shortest one. This doesn't take very long. We're going to jump right into the New Testament after this. Are miracles possible? Because God can use a miracle to tell us who speaks for him. The problem is a lot of people think miracles are impossible. For example, Noah and the ark. Okay, Christians, can we just keep this between us in here? Can we all agree that Noah and the ark is crazy? Thank you. And how about a resurrection? We've already asked this question. Has anyone seen a resurrection? No, yet we all believe in a resurrection if we're Christians. How does that make any sense? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what's the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, it's not the resurrection. Resurrection's easy compared to the greatest miracle. The greatest miracle is I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if God can create the universe out of nothing, then he can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible inside the universe, right? If he can create the whole show. Well, here's the interesting part. Atheists are admitting the data for the first verse. Oh, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? Because if Genesis 1:1 is true, then all these other miracles are at least possible. I'm not saying that they've happened at this point. I'm just saying they're possible, right? I mean, if God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do the Noah miracle? Of course it's crazy, unless God exists. Can he do the Jonah miracle? Of course he can do that, if he exists. Can he raise Jesus from the dead? Of course he can do that if he exists. If he can create the whole show out of nothing, this stuff's easy. This is child's play. Now, I just said something you might not agree with. I said God can do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible. You're probably thinking, oh, I think God can do anything. No, there's even some things God can't do. Like what? He can't do logically impossible things. Like he can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create a married bachelor. Doesn't exist. I know some guys try, but no. He can't create a 5-sided triangle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. Come on, there are some things that are just too hard for God. In fact, you can do some things that God can't do. What can you do? Lie. Change. What's God going to change to? He's already a perfect being. Any change would necessitate a move from perfection to imperfection. No, he is the standard. If he were to lie, he wouldn't be the standard. If he were to change, he wouldn't be the standard. Now, a lot of people don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. right? You've never seen your mind. You believe it? Yeah, you're using it right now. You've never seen the laws of logic or the laws of mathematics. You believe them, don't you? Yeah, you're using them right now. You've never seen justice. Oh, Frank, we've seen no. You've seen justice done or injustice done, but you've never seen justice itself because it's not a physical thing you see. It's an immaterial quality grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love. Everyone believes in love, right? In fact, a number of years ago, I had a couple of debates with Christopher Hitchens. You guys remember who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And at our debate at the College of New Jersey, some student asked him this question, Christopher, what is love? And Christopher, being an atheistic materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. So he said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical. Tomorrow I might not have the chemical. Love is not a chemical. Love is an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, come on. There's gravity right there. Nope, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. You know, we really don't even know what gravity is. Did you know that? We're just seeing its effects. By the way, that's how you know God exists. You know God by his effects. When somebody says, how do you know God exists? You should say by his effects. And this is what scientists do. They reason from effect to cause. If there's a creation, that's the effect. The cause must be a creator. If there's design, that's the effect. The cause must be a designer. If there's a moral law written on our hearts, that's the effect. The cause must be a moral law giver. If there are natural laws that are precise and consistent, then those laws must come from a lawgiver. If you have the ability to think, you have a mind, that's the effect, then there must be a great mind that your mind is made in the image of. You're reasoning from effect back to cause. You've never seen George Washington. Yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause known as George Washington. Same thing is true with Jesus. He's left effects behind that cause us to say, yes, Jesus really existed. And the evidence shows, as we'll see here in a minute, that he really rose from the dead. We're reasoning from effect back to cause. Now, no miracles need to have occurred since Jesus and the apostles for Christianity to be true. There could have been no miracles since then. I think there have been miracles since then. In fact, Craig Keener, a brilliant researcher at Asbury Seminary, has produced a hernia-inducing 2-volume set on miracles, modern-day miracles, where he has documentation of modern-day miracles. It's like 1,200 pages. You can get that if you want. So I think they do occur today. But if miracles do occur, they have to be rare. Why? Because if they happen all the time, they don't get our attention. We go, hey, this stuff happens all the time. I mean, what would happen if people rose from the dead routinely? What would Jesus' resurrection mean to us if resurrections occurred routinely? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. You know, now I got to give the inheritance back, right? No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get our attention. If miracles were common, they wouldn't get our attention as special acts of God. And we need the regularity of the natural world to do what it does continually in order for a miracle to stand out in front of it. Now, there are things that happen every day that truly are miraculous. If they didn't happen every day, we would call them miracles, but they're routine. But they happen so much that we're not amazed by them anymore. How many people in here have ever seen your own children born? Every mother should raise their hand. Any fathers here seen your own children born? Now, when you see another human being come out of you or your wife, and it's your own flesh and blood, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. There's some mind behind this. Yeah, there is. But it happens every day, so we don't call it a miracle. So miracles are possible. By the way, for atheism to be true, think about this. Every single spiritual experience and miracle claim in the history of the world has to be mistaken. Is that possible? Yeah, that's possible. Is that reasonable? No. So miracles are possible. The only question now is, has the greatest miracle in the New Testament occurred? And that is the resurrection of Jesus. We don't have to show the New Testament's inerrant. We just have to show that it's historically reliable enough to conclude that Jesus really rose from the dead. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity's true. Why would Christianity be true if Jesus rose from the dead? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, then he's God. And whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. You say, well, why follow Jesus? Look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody rises from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. Okay? Now, what is the evidence that the New Testament writers are telling the truth about this? There's lots of evidence. We only have time to cover a little bit of them. I'm going to, or a little bit of it. I'm going to list 8 lines of evidence that the New Testament writers are telling the truth. We can only really look at 2 of them, but I'm just going to list the other 6 as well. They all begin with the letter E. First of all, we have early sources. The New Testament documents are written early within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, and much of the data goes all the way back to the events themselves. There are eyewitness details throughout the text. If you look at chapter 10, from I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, you'll see many of them. There's embarrassing stories in there they wouldn't have invented. I'll explain that in a minute, because that and excruciating deaths are the 2 we're going to look into tonight. Number 5, there's embedded confirmation. This is hard to explain in a short period of time, so I'm just going to ask you to Google 2 words. And once you Google these 2 words and you start reading about this, you're going to go, wow, this is the best evidence I never knew about, that the New Testament writers are independently witnessing the same historical events. They couldn't have invented this. Here are the 2 words you want to Google. Undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences. These have been around since about the 1800s, when an Oxford professor and pastor discovered them. And you can even get books online that are free that you can read about these. Undesigned coincidences. I call them embedded confirmation. Also, expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecies. And if I just had one Old Testament prophecy to make my case on, it would be Isaiah chapter 53, describing Jesus 700 years in advance. Also, extra-biblical writers. There are 10 ancient non-Christian sources within 150 years of Jesus' life. Household names like Josephus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon. You've heard of these people, I'm sure, right? And when you take their brief references to Jesus and the apostles, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. None of these people were eyewitnesses. Josephus may have been an eyewitness to some of the events in the early New Testament, but still, they're saying that the New Testament writers, the New Testament apostles, thought they had experiences which caused them to believe Jesus had risen from the dead. And they also said they were willing to die for that belief. These are non-Christian writers, okay? And then the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem is really hard to explain if Jesus' tomb was empty. Or wasn't empty, I should say. If his body was in there, the Romans or the Jews could have stopped Christianity like that. They could have just gone to the tomb, taken out the body. Say, he's dead. Stop all this nonsense talk about the resurrection. Here's his body. They couldn't do that. Why? Jesus was still using his body. He had resurrected. Now, as I say, this is all in the books, but we're just going to spend a little bit of time on 2 of these. The first is embarrassing stories. What does embarrassing stories tell us? Historians know that if there's embarrassing stories in a text about the authors or heroes in the movie or in the book or in the writing or whatever, those embarrassing stories are probably true. Why? Because you're not going to make up details that either make you or your hero look bad, right? In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament, and this is true of the Old Testament as well, but let's just look at the New Testament. The New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories about themselves and even potentially about Jesus that they never would have invented them. That's why we call this the Duff factor. They're not making this up. Let me give you a few examples. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote that down, at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down to discover the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No, if I was there and inventing it, I would make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write down, let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. That sounds pretty good, don't you think? John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down to discover the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact that it was embarrassing to men. It was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. Certainly not a formerly demon-possessed woman. Like Mary Magdalene, oh, what a great witness you got there, right? They would never say the women were the first witnesses. They'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were, as embarrassing as it was. I had a lady come up to me once, and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? Right, he's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the Bible, but it is. This is in the New Testament. Do I have a brain tumor, or is there like a siren going off? What is that?
It's all relative.
It's what?
Relative.
Did we go over time? Oh, somebody's having tea up in the balcony. That must be it. There it is. Thank you. Where were we? Oh, this next verse, I can't even believe it's in the New Testament, but it is. This is the Great Commission. This is where Jesus has his disciples in front of him, and he's about to give them the Great Commission at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, where he says, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. Right? Pastor Josh knows we're trying to make disciples, not just believers, right? Anyway, as he's standing there giving the Great Commission, right there in verse 17, it says this, some believed, but some doubted. What? His disciples are doubting? He's standing resurrected right in front of them, and they're doubting. You see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. No, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you it is. Look, the Romans killed him. They put a spear in his side, blood and water came out. He's dead. It's him. It can't be. They crucified him. He's dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. You know, they're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. In Mark chapter 3, it says his own family came to seize him and take him home because they thought he was out of his mind. Now, you may have heard the scholars say that they embellished Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there when his own family thinks he's nuts? And Mark is almost universally recognized to be the earliest gospel. Also, Jesus is called demon-possessed. You think they made that up? He's called a drunkard. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. Oh, by the way, notice there are 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. The Messiah's bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think Matthew and Luke, when they were writing down the genealogy, said, you know what, I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit? Why don't we put a couple of prostitutes in here? That'll make it fun. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in Jesus' bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, oh, not a good guy. You can read about him in Genesis. How about David? David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in there, too. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. You know what he says instead? Uriah's wife. Ooh, that's a slam, right? He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Why? Who was Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. This is not a made-up story. You will never find Pharaoh's historian saying, hey, Pharaoh, I did your genealogy, and I put a couple of prostitutes in there. And the Pharaoh would chop off your head if you did that. The ultimate no-spin zone is the New Testament documents. They're just telling the truth, as embarrassing as it is. There's a lot more in the book on this, but we got to move to our final point here, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected from the dead died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by merely saying, look, this never happened. Now, it's really important to keep in mind as we look at this, that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, were all Jewish believers in Yahweh. They thought they were God's chosen people, and they didn't believe that anybody could claim to be God, because that would be blasphemy, and they didn't believe that there would be a resurrection in the middle of time. They thought there would be at the end of time, but they didn't think there would be one in the middle of time. So this was totally outside their paradigm to make up a resurrection story about a guy claiming to be God. They never would have done this. And yet, they said it happened. In fact, what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? They already were God's chosen people. What did they have to gain? What happened to them? They got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First we get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up! What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. Now, I get this question a lot. Maybe you do if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. I briefly mentioned them a little while ago. And they're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know what is often underneath that question? An illicit assumption. Here's the illicit assumption. You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were religious, and religious people tend to embellish things. You can only trust the secular writers on this. If you think of that for more than 10 seconds, you realize how stupid that assumption is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying it was true, and they said it was true and went to their deaths for it. Why would they do that? In fact, I don't know if you know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline more than any other cold case homicide detective because he solved murders decades old. Well, Jim and I are colleagues, and he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, where he took his detective skills and tried to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And he also just wrote a fabulous new book called Person of Interest, which you would like as well. Over 400 drawings in the book that he did personally. He's an artist as well. Anyway, Jim says, as a detective, whenever he finds a dead body that he knows has been murdered, he knows that that guy's dead for 3 reasons. One of these 3 reasons or a combination of the 3. There's not 1,000 reasons, just one of these 3. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. That's why people commit crimes. Now, if you're going to say that this was some kind of conspiracy, you've got to find one of those motivators in this. By the way, the sex, money, and power, those are the reasons we all sin, right? Sex, money, and power are good things, but they're so good that often we'll take shortcuts to get them. Now, let's think about this. Did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No. Did they get money for saying Jesus had risen from the dead? No, they were not 21st century prosperity gospel preachers in leisure suits, okay? Did they get power for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they got the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power as a persecutor of the church. As soon as he became a Christian, he was persecuted. No, they got none of this. None of the motivators, sex, money, or power, are here. This is not an invented story. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank, if you're going to say that martyrdom proves Christianity, don't you have to say that martyrdom proves Islam? Because some Muslims will kill themselves for their faith. No, we don't. Why? Well, there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything to show them that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead. They witnessed him rise from the dead. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. You see, many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, the next thing I'm about to say is going to sound like heresy for just a minute, for those of you that believe the Bible's inerrant like I do. But it's not, just stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Of course he was. Why did he write the book of Romans? Because the risen Jesus appeared to him. Was Matthew a Christian before he wrote the Gospel of Matthew? Of course he was. Why did he write the Gospel of Matthew? Because the risen Jesus had appeared to him. He knew who he was. They were Christians long before there was a book. And they were Jews. Why? Because they witnessed an event. They didn't read a book. They witnessed an event. Now, thankfully, they wrote it down so we could know what happened and then orient our lives toward it. But Christianity would be true even if no one ever wrote it down. We just wouldn't know much about it. Do you see the point? In other words, we could say it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. you would not have documents written by Jews in first century Israel saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead unless he really did. They had too much to lose. Now, as I say, there's a lot more evidence that we don't have time to get into, and it's a cumulative case. Not just two of these points. You got to go through all this evidence to really see the weight of it, which we don't have time to do. But let's cover the whole thing briefly again. Does truth exist? The answer is? Yes. Someone says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? Yes. We talked about three arguments. Argument from the beginning of the universe, argument from the design of the universe and the design of life, and also the moral law. The fact that there's got to be a moral lawgiver and a purpose to life. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, and even atheists are admitting the data for that. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Yes, it seems like he did. If he did, then everything falls into place. If he didn't, forget it, sleep in, go home, do what you want. Or as Augustine said, love God and do as you please. What does that mean? That if you truly love God, you should want to please him. So, if you want to go further, the books are available and the DVDs. I think we run out of DVDs. If you want one, if you pay for it now, we're going to ship it to this church free of charge, so you don't have to pay shipping. I mean, you can get it on our website, but then you got to pay shipping. So if you want it, just sign up at the book table, and we'll send it to you. So by next Sunday, it should be here. You can just pick it up, okay? Because we ran out early. The first service bought everything, okay? We're now teaching online courses. Go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You'll see them all there. I teach some of them. We have many other people teaching. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it YouTwitface. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Have you signed up for YouTwitface yet? Okay. We're also on Instagram. In fact, there's over 1,000 videos on our YouTube channel. Many of them are from the college campus, short Q&A videos, so you can share that with people. Also, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. Wherever you find podcasts, you should be able to find that once a week. It's only 48 minutes long. We usually provide evidence for Christianity in there. Also, we're on DirecTV, as I mentioned, on the NRB network, and it's also on our website on Wednesday nights. There's that number I mentioned this morning. If you want this entire PowerPoint presentation, just text that word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582, and I'm going to send you the entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. So you can look at this at your leisure. Even slides I couldn't show you tonight because I couldn't cover it all. And then if you don't do anything, download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examine. It has the podcast on there. It has the TV show streaming on there. It even has a quick answer section. So you could be having lunch with somebody, and they say something against Christianity that you don't know how to answer. All you need to do is take out your iPhone and go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? All right? And it's free. Check it out. All right, last thing before your questions. It's true. The big question we all have is, so what? So what if Christianity's true? Well, you know what this means? This means that someone actually did die for you. It's like Michael Monsoor died for his friends. The only difference is Jesus died for his enemies. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were hard enough to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy. There's probably nothing more difficult in any military service to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5 or 10%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery just outside of San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed himself for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to put our identity in our Savior. But you know, our culture says, no, put your identity in your political party. Or put your identity in your race. There's only one race, the human race. Or put your identity in your ethnic group. Or put your identity in your bank account, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or your sexual orientation. You know none of those things are ultimate, ladies and gentlemen. We were meant to put our identity in our Savior. Do you know in every other worldview, you have to achieve your identity. In Christianity, you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. If you have to achieve your identity, that's all the pressure's on you. There's always somebody that can do it better. And what happens if you base your identity on something you can do and then you can no longer do it anymore? Or you put your identity in another person and then they're gone. Do you cease being an individual? Talk about an identity crisis. No, you put your identity in the one that made you and sacrificed himself for you. You receive it. You don't achieve it. An eyewitness of all this, who wrote a biography we call the Gospel of John, said in the very first chapter that God has given you the right to become a child of God. How do you become a child of God? You simply accept what he's done for you. Then you're forgiven for what you've done, and you're given his righteousness. What could be better than that? This is why it's called the greatest story ever told. And it's true. But he didn't just die, he also rose again to prove he was God and to also let us know that we'll rise again. So with that being said, we're going to go to questions. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. Right here. Second question, just come right on up to the microphone. And after the first person comes up, then we'll have a lot more people come up. So come on right up here. And I will also put up a different, hang on a second. There's that phone number again if you guys want to get the PowerPoint. And if you want to take a survey that'll help us improve this, just text the word event to that number. Okay, I'm going to ask you 3 questions via text. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Ramy.
Say again?
Ramy.
Hey, Raymond, come on in a little closer.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
You didn't talk specifically about this, but it's just something that has been on my mind and on my heart just over time, listening to different, I would call them, great minds of our time, different people that we hear speaking that believe a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, they believe in creation. But I hear them kind of mixing kind of evolutionary concepts with the Bible and saying, to kind of taking the creation story allegorically and saying, oh yeah, the world is actually, millions and millions of years old. But I'm just wondering, what are some good ways to debate that, and what are your thoughts on that as far as the evolutionary concepts, but also talking about how old the world is?
Well, I'm absolutely convinced the universe is at least 59 years old. And in a couple weeks, it's going to be at least 60 years old, okay? Christians have different views on how old the universe is, and I don't think that's something we ought to divide over, because no matter how far back you go, you're going to need a creator. Whether it's billions of years or thousands of years, the better evidence, it seems to me, is that the universe is billions of years old, okay? Because we get evidence both from science and the Bible, and they're both from God. Natural revelation and general revelation, or natural revelation and special revelation. Natural revelation is what we get from just observing the world around us, and special revelation is from the Bible. And I think you can make a case from the Bible that the universe is young, but you can also make a case it's old. So I think the weight of the evidence says that the universe is old. So no matter how far back you go, you're going to need a creator. Now, with regard to evolution, we could spend a lot of time talking about this. When people say, do you believe in evolution? I say, what do you mean by evolution? If you mean change over time, yeah, count me in. We see that. If you mean microevolution, adaptation within a type, yeah, we see that. If you mean macroevolution, molecules to man without any intelligence, no. I don't believe that, and I think there's evidence against it. And in our book, Stealing from God, we spent a fair amount of time on that. But let me say this, even if macroevolution were true, it wouldn't mean Christianity's false. Why? Because if macroevolution is true, it might explain how subsequent life forms got here, but it wouldn't explain so many other things about the universe, like where did the universe come from, and why is it fine-tuned, and where did the first life come from, and why are there objective moral laws, and why can we think, where do these laws of logic and reason come from, and where does consciousness come from, and where do all these, Jesus rising from the dead. Evolution, if it explains anything about reality, it's a very small sliver of reality, and you need to explain all of it. And the laws that drive evolution, as we mentioned earlier, those natural laws that keep doing the same thing over and over again have to be sustained, created and sustained by a mind. So even if macroevolution is true, you don't get rid of the need for God. All right?
Great. Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, Vika.
Say again?
Vika, I'm originally from Ukraine.
Vika, oh, from Ukraine.
Yes.
Well,
but we live
welcome.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the work you do. We often watch your YouTube videos with my husband before bed. They're awesome.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So I have a question. I was on a Christian mom group recently, and there was one question that a mom posted. She said, one of my Christian friends, he's getting married, but he's getting married to a male. What do I do? How do I comment? And so the Christian moms are saying, well, you know, Jesus is love, so you should just say, if you don't want to say, I support you, just say, what are you most excited about? Oh, that's so exciting, and like all these answers. And I usually don't go online and post anything, but this was just mind-blowing to me. So I was like, I don't think that's what Jesus would say. And so then the admins and all of the, you know, all the moms were like, well, you're so judgmental, like, you know. And I was like, wow, like to me, question of homosexuality is like a sin. And so they were trying to prove to me this is a doctrinal thing. And I was like, no, like doctrines, it's like women, you know, in leadership and like baptism. And so then I'm thinking like, what do I say to them? Like if, you know, the admins and it's Christian mom groups.
I think one of the things you can say,
Yeah.
because you're covering a lot of issues there, I think one of the things you want to ask them is, what is your standard for right and wrong? And see what they say. Because I've noticed that in today's culture, fewer people are doing theology and more people are doing meology, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever I say is right. Mm-hmm. Whatever the culture says is right. And so I'm always asking people, you're calling yourself a Christian, why are you disagreeing with Jesus? Mm-hmm. Jesus said marriage is between a man and a woman. He says it in Matthew 19, okay? For Jesus, marriage is one man and one woman for one lifetime till death do them part. They're one flesh till death do them part. That's what marriage is, okay? Now, it goes back to what we said earlier, that I know this is a difficult issue because people are going to be upset with you, but and if you're a Christian in here, our stand is to stand with Jesus and to tell people the truth in as a loving way as we can and leave the results to God. In fact, if somebody doesn't hate you, you're doing something wrong.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay? Right? You have to tell people the truth. As we said earlier, if you tell people what they need to hear, you're helping them. If you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself.
And that's what I was trying, but then they came up with this whole article. I guess a lot of moms messaged me privately, and they're like, thank you so much for, you know, telling the truth, which to me was like then just let's do it together. Like, why am I only one posting about it? But then they came up with an article saying, you know, we want to say that, you know, we shouldn't judge the doctrines. And
all right, as soon as they say you're being judgmental, what could you say back to them?
Don't judge me.
Yeah, why are you judging me for judging then? And look, this isn't my morality. It's not my judgment that marriage is between a man and a woman. It's Jesus's. He set this whole thing up. He's given us the purpose of life. So what I say isn't really important. In fact, when people ask me, what do you think about homosexuality or same-sex marriage? I say, it doesn't matter what I think about it. I'm not the moral arbiter of the universe. Just like if you were to ask me, what do you think about rape? It doesn't matter what I think about it. It's wrong because it goes against what God wants. Okay, because He is the standard of good and He knows the purpose for our lives and the track we ought to take.
Awesome.
All right?
Thank you.
Thanks for standing for truth. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
And we too are very thankful for you. We watch a lot of your stuff on YouTube.
Oh,
so
thank you.
very
You and my
thankful.
mom. Beautiful.
My question is kind of difficult to articulate. If you're talking to an atheist or an agnostic person that comes to you and says, well, just as long as you're being a functional member of society, and I've heard your rebuttal to that to not look at society because we see Russia and Germany and China and all these oppressive, socialist societies. So my question is there a way to point that the origin of society comes from the Bible, like that in it of itself is stealing from God? Are there passages in the Bible that support that society in and of itself comes from God?
Well, God gave us 3 institutions. The first institution he gave us was government. I'm sorry, the family, Adam and Eve. The second was government, and the third is the church.
Yes.
So you get the family
Yes.
right away in Genesis.
Yes.
A little bit later in about chapter 9, you get government of Genesis, and then you don't get the church till the New Testament, okay? So, yes, you could say that the origin, the direction for society comes from Genesis, but I don't know if that's going to go anywhere with a secularist. Yeah. I would always ask a secularist or anybody who's not a Christian, by what standard do you make these judgments?
Because I was reading through some different theories of society, and one of them was the organismics, and that comes from like the epistles. When they talk about an organism, I'm like, that's what the church is, the hand, the feet, the eyes. We read that in the Bible. So if they go with that theory, I'm like, that's biblical. So different theories.
Yes, it's a
of
biblical
society.
truth, but it was in place before the Bible was written, obviously, right? I mean, there were many nations that had governments prior to the New Testament. So I don't know if you want to take that line of argumentation with people. What you might want to do, if I see where you're going with this or where they're going with this, is they're saying, well, we don't need God because we just want to do what's right for the most people or come up with some sort of moral claim like this. You've got to ask them, where are you getting that standard from? And why do you think that's true? As soon as people start using words like what's beneficial or human flourishing or what brings the most good to the most people, they're assuming a moral standard. Where does this moral standard come from? Why assume that we ought to treat people well? Who said? If there's no purpose, there's no reason to, there's no justification for it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Frank.
Yes, sir.
My name's Kevin.
Hey, Kevin.
I spoke to a Muslim and gave them polemic and apologetic arguments from your books and others I studied and answered every question they had in detail. But I left the conversation feeling like all I did was hurt their feelings and I didn't bring them closer to the real God. I felt that I was too combative and all I wanted to do was win the argument. My question to you is, how do you handle knowing the truth in a conversation and not letting your emotions get in the way of and trying to win the argument?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I normally, if things get tense, I normally stop and I say, now look, we're all adults here, Mr. Poopy Pants. That usually works, okay? For you Naked Gun fans. I think, first of all, I hardly ever argue with anybody online. It's just not me.
Yeah.
And I think it's real easy to get ornery and negative online. We say stuff to people online that we would never say to them in person, right? Why do we do that? I think we have to be overly kind online if we're going to argue with people online.
No,
But
I'm talking real life. I'm not talking online.
Oh, in person?
Yeah, this is real life.
Okay, well, I really think that these things are personal and emotional, and so sometimes you can go a little bit too far in your enthusiasm. But I also think what you want to ask people is questions like, particularly the Muslim person, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian, right? And then just be quiet, because if the person hesitates or says no, it doesn't matter how much evidence you give them. They're not interested. And a Muslim in particular probably has the most to lose if they leave Islam. Number one, they may even be killed, depending upon where they're from. Because to leave Islam is to become an infidel, and according to the Quran, that person should be killed. And secondly, they may lose their family and their job and all these things. So it's very difficult to leave a worldview like that, just like it is with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, because they will disfellowship you, and you might not even be able to make a living. So it's a hard question to ask, but at least it's a question that if you ask it and then remain silent, you can really sense the person's heart.
So ask them if they want to hear the truth and just be quiet.
Yeah, or no, ask them if it were true.
If it were true.
Would you
Okay.
become a Christian?
Okay.
Now, if they say something like, yeah, but it's not true, they're not open. Right. In fact, let's be honest, most people are not open. Most people are set in their ways, and there needs to be some event that occurs in their lives for them to sometimes turn. So if you ever ask somebody the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And they hesitate or say no, you might as well just go have pizza with them.
Yep.
And all you can do at that point is pray for them and love them, and maybe plant seeds every now and then. And then at some point in that person's life, there's probably going to be a tragedy. It happens to all of us. And if the person is open at that point, your phone is going to ring, and that person's going to be on the other end, right? If the person's an atheist, they're not going to call their atheist friends. What's the atheist friend going to say? Hey, there's no purpose to life anyway. Stuff happens, right? They're going to call a person of spiritual depth, and that would be you. When the student's ready, the teacher will appear. So sometimes it's not a matter of answers or any of that. It's just a matter of timing, right?
Okay.
Make sense?
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Hey, that's a good question, Kevin. And by the way, thanks for engaging with people. So few people will. Let me just ask a question before we go to our next question here. I ask a question of the audience. Everyone in here, if this is just for Christians, if you're a Christian in here, this question's just for you. I want you to think of somebody you know who's not a Christian whom you'd like to be a Christian. Friend, family member, whoever it is. Everybody got someone? All right, don't point at them. All right? Okay, here's my question about the person you're thinking of. Is the person you're thinking of on a relentless pursuit of truth? In other words, they want to know if Christianity is true or not, or are they apathetic or maybe even hostile to Christianity? How many people say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true. Anybody in the balcony? I can hardly see the balcony. I've got one hand so far. All right, how many people say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Put your hand up. Yeah, look around the room. It's the same everywhere I go. It's 100 to 0 or 99 to 1. Most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop, okay? God is going to get in their way. They don't want God to exist because they want to do their own thing. They want to be God. Now, sometimes it's going to take a tragedy for them to be shaken out of their apathy or their hostility, or some other event's going to occur. So it's like pushing a rope with these people, right? It's hard to do. So all you can do is love them, plant seeds, pray for them. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Trista.
Hey, Tracy, go ahead. Get a little closer if you would.
So I have a friend in the place where we are staying right now, and she has told me that her stepfather is hostile to her. And I want to know how I can get involved, or even if I should get involved.
Wow, that's a hard question. That's not a question I can answer. You need to talk to a pastor here. I don't know, Josh, can you help Tracy here with that question? But I'm glad you're concerned. So if that really is the case, you need to tell somebody. Okay, so, or Adam, can you help Tracy with that? Thanks for bringing that up, Tracy. Yeah, we've got to point that out. If there's an adult who's not treating a young person well, we need to know about it. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Stephen.
Stephen, get a little closer if you would, Stephen.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
So first off, I just want to say thank you so much for presenting tonight. I've listened to you a lot, and I really appreciate hearing your perspective on things, and just the way in which you present the gospel and the way in which you present arguments about God is amazing to hear, and it gives me a lot of help as I'm trying to talk to other people. I did listen to a debate that you had with the cosmic skeptic from a couple of years ago, and so I kind of was tracking him down and listening to some of the things that he said. Recently, I've heard him kind of talk about the cosmological argument. So everything that has a beginning has a cause, the universe has a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause.
Yeah.
And he has kind of talked about the idea that, a lot of atheists really focus on that second premise, that the universe has a beginning. But as you presented tonight, and as he's also even willing to accept the claim that the second premise is kind of irrelevant to argue about, considering the overwhelming evidence that supports the idea. So in his recent things that he's been talking about or writing about has really been attacking the first premise. And the first premise really looking at the idea that, everything has a beginning, has a cause. And so one of the things that he's really been focusing on in a lot of his writings or in his podcasts, et cetera, has been talking about the idea that we really break down that first premise, what you're talking about is the idea that the universe is really the only thing that has a beginning, quote unquote, because there's nothing that you and I can come up with that has a beginning. So for instance, if I say I have a car, or I have a book, or I have a computer, it all has come from something else. It's elements of matter and energy that have been recombined to create.
Yeah, but that's not
a thing.
true. You can come up with an idea that you've never thought of before, and it's not made of matter.
So what he's trying to do is boil that argument down, which he admits is a valid argument on its own, to a circular argument of saying that the universe exists, the universe has a cause, therefore the universe has a cause, which would be circular in its reasoning. So I just was trying to figure out what your perspective is on that argument and how to best address
I would
that.
say, first of all, the question, he has the burden of proof. The rest of us don't have the burden of proof to support the premise that everything that has a beginning has a cause. He has the burden of proof to find out why that's not the case. And if he's going to attack the premise that everything that has a beginning has a cause, he might as well give up on all science, because that's what science uses, cause and effect. When you're doing science, you're trying to figure out what caused a particular effect. And if you're going to say effects can occur without causes, there goes science, right? Secondly, causality appears to be metaphysical, not just physical. It's not just about things bumping into one another. For example, if causality wasn't metaphysical, meaning that it didn't apply to things that aren't physical, then logic wouldn't work. Take a premise, something like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. There's no physical connection between those premises and the conclusion, but it goes through. So it seems to me causality is a metaphysical premise, not just a physical premise. We're not just looking for a material cause. We may be looking for an efficient cause, which could be immaterial. His own mind, which is coming up with these counter-arguments, if those causes in his mind are purely physical and his thoughts are purely physical, in other words, he's driven completely by the laws of physics, he just has a brain and not a mind, why should we trust the thing he says? Because he's not really reasoning, he's just reacting. This goes back to the C.S. Lewis quote we had up earlier, right? That unless my brain was designed for thinking, I shouldn't believe it. But I do believe it, so it must be designed for thinking. Remember how Lewis said, unless I believe in thought, I can't believe in any argument for or against God, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. So it seems to me the real Achilles heel for any atheist, particularly someone like cosmic skeptic Alex O'Connor, nice young man. He's only like 22, 23 years old.
He's really smart.
Yeah, he's very smart. He just doesn't seem to recognize that his whole worldview is self-defeating. Right? Because he's assuming there are no immaterial causes while he's thinking, and he's using immaterial causation to come up with these thoughts.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, go ahead.
In your time of discussing these different topics with different atheists or non-believers, you mentioned, for instance, I forgot his name, Silverman, if I remember
David
correctly.
Silverman, yeah.
Okay. So, for instance, when he presented that to you, right, you said he was Jewish, right?
Yeah.
So he hopefully would have recognized that the very, foundation of his belief system is leading him to say something that we all know is morally objectionable, which is the Holocaust.
Right.
Is not. So have you ever seen or had a moment where someone who is really strong in their atheism or really strong in their skepticism has been, turned, or at least has had more of an aha moment with you? Have you had one of those moments?
It's not going to happen in a debate format because that person is too wedded to their position as am I, mine. So rarely are you going to have a debater go, I'm now a Christian, right? That's not going to happen, okay? Really, when you're debating, you're really trying to affirm the Christians in the audience and put a stone in the shoe of the skeptics to go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, maybe move them a little bit closer to Christianity. So, we get emails and that kind of thing from people who were atheists and have become Christians partially through some of our work, but it's rarely just a one-time thing. It's a process. In fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace calls evangelism kind of like baseball. Everyone tries to hit a home run. Just get the guy to first base. Somebody will move him to second, then third, and then home, right? Yeah. You don't have to get everybody to the foot of the cross with every conversation. If you think you have to do that, you'll never talk to anybody. Just get them to believe that truth exists. Then somebody can tell them about God, and somebody else can tell them about miracles, and somebody else can tell them about the resurrection, and boom, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
So my question, I watched a debate recently between Matt Dillahunty and a gentleman who goes by Converse Contender, and to be honest, the Christian Converse Contender got smacked in the debate. I myself am a Christian, in case you can't tell, but it was regarding slavery in the Bible, and so I was just wondering how you personally address the idea of slavery in the Bible.
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's a question that's going to come up a lot. Is there really slavery in the Bible? And the problem is that a lot of people don't really understand the kind of slavery that's talked about in the Bible. It's not the kind of Bible, or it's not the kind of slavery we think about a number of years ago. In the Old Testament, slavery was not race-based forced servitude. It was actually a voluntary means of working off debt or keeping captives in a rebellion. So it was indentured servitude, where somebody was in debt and they had to work off that debt. They would put themselves basically in the employment of someone else who would take care of their room and board and that kind of thing in exchange for work. Remember, there was no welfare system in Israel. That's why in the Old Testament it tells farmers to leave the corners of their fields for the poor. So they wouldn't farm the corners of their fields so the poor could actually use that for food. Secondly, slave trading is condemned in the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testaments. In fact, it's punishable by death in the Old Testament. The kind of slave trading we had in America, if we read the Bible, we would have said that's wrong. But we didn't follow the Bible properly on that. Also, the Bible teaches that all are made in the image of God. Slave and master are equally human, protected, and they're one in Christ. This is the consistent teaching of all the Old Testament and the New Testament. And furthermore, Jesus came to set the captives free. And the Bible's purpose is spiritual redemption, not social reform, but redemption achieves reform. Now, if you really want to get into all the details and the nuances of this, this is the book you want to get by Paul Copan, Is God a Moral Monster? He goes into not only slavery, but killing the Canaanites and the odd laws to us in the Old Testament. What's that all about? So this is the book I would highly recommend you get. And I think Paul is updating this if you want. In fact, here's a couple of quotes from the book. He says, Israel's servant laws were concerned about controlling or regulating, not idealizing an inferior work arrangement. Israelite servitude was induced by poverty and was entered into voluntarily and was far from optimal. The intent of these laws was to combat potential abuses, not to institutionalize servitude. So it was a way to try and make a bad situation better, but not to say we want slavery. The whole race-based thing really came into existence in our country. Prior to that, slavery across the world was rarely race-based. And not many people know this, but the word slave comes from Slav, because the Slavs had been slaves for so many years. And there have been more white people taken in slavery in Europe than there ever were taken from Africa. Not that we're comparing things and saying, okay, it's right to do. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying people of all different ethnic groups have been slaves at some point. All right? Thomas Sowell has written on that, by the way, and you can check out him if you want to go further.
Yeah, I have Paul Copan's book there.
Oh, yeah?
So I just haven't, I've made it like maybe 15 pages in, so I guess I'll just finish it to get a cohesive answer.
By the way, for somebody like Matt Dillahunty, an atheist, I would ask him, by what standard is slavery wrong? Who said? You're saying it's wrong? I have a standard, God's nature, that says it's wrong. And so if you're going to complain about the Bible, or you're going to complain about anything in the Bible, you're actually stealing a standard from God while you're saying God doesn't exist.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, Sebastian.
Hey, Sebastian.
How you doing, Frank?
Hey, by the way, we're at 8:30. We can go a little bit longer. Is that all right? If you guys have to leave, you can't stay for 4 hours. I get it, but we can stay a little bit longer if that's okay. All right. Go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to ask about your presentation. That quote that you just brought up by C.S. Lewis. unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought.
Yep.
So I could never,
Never use thought to disbelieve in God, yeah.
Yeah. So was that from the book Christ? What was it?
Mere
What was it?
Christianity?
Mere Christianity.
That was actually from one of his talks on the BBC, as were the books, as were the talks that came into Mere Christianity and made it a book.
Okay.
In World War II, Lewis would go on the BBC and do these talks, and they was eventually made into the book called Mere Christianity. That particular quote was from a book called Broadcast Talks. And I don't know if you can even get the book anymore. You may be able to find it online used or something.
Okay.
But he says that similar elsewhere. It may be in the book Miracles, maybe.
Okay.
Because Lewis is really good talking about how materialism shows that if you're a materialist, you should have no reason to believe your mind or anything else. Right? Because you're just a moist robot, a molecular machine. All right.
And then another thing you mentioned, you pointed out in your speech as well, was that God calls us to go and make disciples,
Yeah.
and not just believers. And I
Right.
wanted to ask you about that, because me and my friend do a ministry, and we are, chasing after kids' hearts, and we want them to come to know Christ. And I kind of believe that if they come to know Christ and if they accept him, that they will eventually, Lord willing, but eventually become a disciple. So when you kind of highlighted go and make disciples, so what would you...
Well, it doesn't happen casually.
Yeah, right.
You can't microwave
Right.
discipleship.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's something, and we all want everything microwaved, right? We all, our biggest problem is we're distracted by iPhones and iPads and TikTok and all this stuff that we want everything right away. Amazon, that's not the way you get good at anything.
Right.
It's a long-term, deliberate approach you need to take to get good at anything. Not just being a Christian disciple, but anything you want to do.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that it's something that has to be deliberate. And if it's not deliberate, the world isn't neutral. The world is going to pull people away from Christ.
Right.
If you're not pulling in the other direction to try and get them closer to Christ, the world's just going to pull them like a riptide out into oblivion.
Yeah, right. Cool.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sebastian. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy.
So I have just a simple question that we hear Christians always ask about. Can Christians lose their salvation?
I think we're about out of time. In fact, Pastor Josh and I were talking about that over lunch, and there are different views on this. I think you can make a case either way. I personally think the way Jesus puts it in John chapter 5 when he says, "He who believes has passed from death into life," shows that you can't lose your salvation. Because he says once you believe, you've passed from death into life. In other words, you get eternal life when you believe. You don't get it when you die. And if you get it when you believe, then you can't lose it. Now, it could be that many people who walk away from the faith never truly were Christians. Jesus talks about that quite a bit, where he says, hey, the people say, "Oh, didn't we heal people in your name?" And hey, away from me, I never knew you. Yeah. So, although, people do make cases that you can walk away, I think the better arguments are that once you're saved, you're always saved.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Cassidy.
Say again?
Cassidy.
Hey, Cassidy, go ahead.
So I have an agnostic friend who's open to the idea of God, but his biggest question when I was talking to him was, how can a good God who, loves his children banish them to eternal damnation? And I did not know how to answer that, so I figured I would ask you.
I'll give you a story that happened at the University of Michigan when I was debating an atheist there a number of years ago. His name was Eddie Tabash, and he asked me this question. He said, "Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived a life full of pain and suffering, and toward the end of her life, somebody offered her the gospel, but she rejected it. Is she in hell right now?" I thought that was a pretty good question in front of a secular audience. So I said, "Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion or not, but if she didn't accept Christ before she died, then God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will." You see, what's the assumption? Everybody wants to go to heaven. Not everybody wants to go to heaven. Who's in heaven? Jesus is in heaven. There have been people running from Jesus their entire lives. What's he going to do in the afterlife? Going, hey, where are you going? You're with me now. Get over here. You say, well, wait, what's all this business about hell then? So I asked the University of Michigan audience a question, and I'll ask you guys the question, the same question. This question is actually for the ladies. Okay, ladies? Ladies, have you ever had a man pursue you whom you did not want to date? Some of you are going, yeah, and he's sitting next to me right now, right? He will not leave me alone. Well, suppose this man keeps pursuing you, he keeps asking you out, and you finally say, look, I like you, but only as a... Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it? Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Gentlemen, if you ever get the dreaded friend rejection, move on, she's not interested. In fact, I have some shocking news for you. She doesn't even like you as a friend. Right? Because if she did, she would be interested, but she's not. Ladies, you know I'm telling you the truth, right? You don't really like him as a friend. You're just saying that to be nice. Well, suppose this doesn't deter the guy. He keeps coming. He says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Ladies, run screaming from the building. Can he force you to love him? No, love by definition must be freely given. So ladies, if he truly did love you, what would he do? He would leave you alone. That's what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us Christ. He sends us a Bible. He sends us this church and Pastor Josh. He may send you a radio broadcast or a TV broadcast. If you're a Muslim in a far-off land, he may send you a dream or a vision. And if he does all that and you keep saying, no, I want to go my own way, God will leave you alone. That's what he'll do. He'll leave you alone. Because in the end, there's only two destinations. You're going to be with God in the afterlife, that's heaven. You're going to be separated from God in the afterlife, that's hell. You say, what could be so bad about being separated from God? Well, think about it this way. Regardless of what you believe, whether you're a Christian or not, it says that God's love or his rain falls on the just and the unjust. Everyone has common grace, right? Good things go for bad people, bad things go for good people, right? Everybody, regardless of what you believe, experiences some good in life, right? You experience love, experience relationships, you think about a future, you have hope, all these things. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no love, there are no relationships, there is no future, there is no hope. There's just stone, cold, narcissistic self-absorption. That is Washington. No, I'm sorry. That is hell. You're cut off from the ultimate source of goodness by your own choice. Because, look, people are going to go where they justly should go. It would be unjust of God to put somebody in heaven if they didn't want to be there. And the kind of justice that he's going to deal out in hell is going to be proportional to their sin. So it's the right place for people to go. He can't force them in. Look, C.S. Lewis said it best at the end of one of his books, I think maybe The Great Divorce, where he said, in the end, there's only two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. I would also point out to your friend that he has a moral objection. Notice this is a moral objection to God. Where's he getting this standard from, that it would be wrong for God to be just in the afterlife? Yeah, ask him. He's stealing it from God. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cassidy. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name's Amanda.
Say again?
Amanda.
Anna?
Amanda.
Oh, Amanda, sorry, go ahead.
So, based off of Washington, I'm going to ask about politics. It's crazy nowadays. It just keeps getting worse. So, what is your encouragement for Christians to stand up against that, or to get involved, or do we just kind of hide? I feel like we just hide more than trying to change, because we're pushing God out of everything.
Yeah, when Christians say don't get involved in politics, I just tell them to take out their iPhone, and I just show them one picture. Here's the picture I show them. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, that is the Korean Peninsula, a satellite view of the Korean Peninsula at night, right? Here's the 38th parallel. We fought a war over that. We still got a bunch of troops here. This is North Korea. So my question is, why is there a difference between South and North Korea? Don't say electricity, okay? North Korea or South Korea has freedom and has a lot of Christians in it. North Korea is a concentration camp. There's one reason for the difference: politics. The South has political freedom, the North does not. My only question is, which country would you rather live in? South or North? Then you ought to be involved in politics. You say, Frank, we have religious freedom in this country. Not for long, things keep going. The whole reason our country is where it is now, it's not because the liberals have done all this or the leftists. It's because the church hasn't spoken up. That's why. The people on the left are just doing what they think's right. The people who are Christians aren't speaking up. So our goal as Christians is to bring our influence into the public square, not just for our own good, but for the good of everybody. And we ought to do that, if for no other reason, because we want to live and preach the gospel, and laws affect our ability to do that. In fact, if you think about what laws do, here's what laws do. Think about this. Laws affect your freedom, your church, your children, your family, your health, your money, your business, your property, your school, your home, your security, your safety, the poor, the unborn, the gospel, everyone and everything. So are only atheists permitted to get involved in these things? No. Everybody ought to be involved, I think. Whether you're a Christian, atheist, or anywhere in between. If you care about these things, you ought to be involved. And you say, oh, Frank, some of this stuff is so hopeless. Let me point this out. It is not your job to win any political debate. It's your job to be faithful and leave the results to God. So just be faithful. Just do what's right, and whatever happens, happens. Make sense? All right, thank you.
How's it going?
Yes, sir.
Hey, I had a question just kind of on behalf of Christians and unbelievers in general. I think one of the things I hear the most from people that don't believe is, you know, my mom was sick with cancer. I prayed to God, he didn't heal her. Or I hear from Christians themselves saying, you know, I prayed this thing. The Bible says that if you ask, you shall receive. Mm-hmm. And I think we always leave that answer to be the will of God, and God's going to do what he wants. And so I guess I kind of have two questions. What do you say to people that kind of have enough faith to pray to a God to say, well, if you're real, you would do this? And then to the Christian that kind of leaves themselves in doubt when they're like, well, I prayed and I kept praying and God didn't answer my prayer request and now I'm struggling with my faith.
I would ask the question, does God promise to answer every prayer that you have? And the answer is no. Does God promise that Christians will always be comfortable and happy? The answer is no. In fact, if you read the scriptures, particularly from the apostles themselves, they didn't get comfort and happiness. They didn't get wealth. They got beaten, tortured, and killed. And they deemed that that was something that they rejoiced in because they could suffer along with Christ. And our idea of suffering along with Christ is when Wi-Fi goes down, right? I think that a lot of people have the wrong idea of who God is. We think God is our cosmic candy machine, that whatever we want, we're going to get. Let me just ask you this, friends. If you got everything you wanted every time, would you be more like Jesus or more like Satan? I would become more like Satan if I got everything I wanted every time. I need no in my life. I need difficulty in my life. I need obstacles in my life. That's the only way you're ever going to develop a character that is actually not just all about you. And I think our biggest problem in America, I know this is going to sound crazy after we just talked about politics, but our biggest problem in America is prosperity. Why? Not that I want people to go into economic trouble. I've been there. I don't want that. I'm simply saying, as Jesus said, it's difficult for a rich man to get into heaven. Why? Because we think if we're rich, we don't need God. We just do our own thing. You know, sometimes you only look up when you're on your back. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here came to faith, at least partially, through pain and suffering? Raise your hand. Wow. It's probably 30, 40% of us. How many people in here have grown closer to God through pain and suffering? Well, that's everybody. See that? So I would question the assumptions that people have about God and ask them, is that the true God? That God is going to give you everything you want? This is why I have big trouble with the prosperity gospel people, because they're not really preaching the true gospel. You know, it's all about health and wealth. And if that were true, first of all, I don't know any like 600-year-old Pentecostals. Do you? Okay? That people, you just keep praying and they keep staying alive. They keep getting healed. Can you imagine grandma? Would you let grandma go? She's 612 years old, right? Quit praying for her. She wants to go be with Jesus. No, I mean, we're meant to run down in this world. We're meant to move on, and sometimes we get sick, and sometimes we die younger than we expect. But
so just a follow-up question, like, you know, we do a prayer show and we get a lot of prayer requests, and I think ultimately everybody's believing for that miracle to happen. So how would you encourage people, especially in ministry, that are looking for that, and then in the, you know, the death or the circumstance or whatever, how would you, and I think you kind of hit on it, but just so everybody here can hear, like, how do you talk people through God didn't answer your prayer? And I think you kind of hit on that, but just to kind of reiterate.
yeah, you don't talk them through it initially. You just be with them. Yeah. Right? In fact, sometimes I get the question, you know, if God, why evil? And I go into my philosophical answer, and then I realize, this is not the answer that's appropriate at this point. When someone asks, if God, why evil? I should stop and say, well, why do you ask that? Yeah. If the person's just intellectually curious, then the philosophical answer or the scriptural answer is good. But if the person's baby just died 2 weeks ago, they don't need a philosopher, they need a pastor. So I think that you just be with them, and then when they're ready to talk about it, then you can. This is why I think apologetics is very important for, not necessarily for unbelievers, it's really important for believers. You ought to be prepared to answer the questions of evil before evil comes upon you. It's the old adage, when's the best time to get a friend? Before you need one, right? When's the best time to know how to deal with evil? Before it befalls you. Get the answers now, so when it comes, you're ready. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, thanks. There's a fair amount in the book Stealing from God on that, and of course you get a lot of answers from the book of Job and 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Suzette.
Hey, Suzette.
I have a question that wears on my heart every single day. You said marriage is one man, one woman for life, but divorce and remarriage is so rampant in the church. And I have, for the last 27 years, tried to find the truth. No matter who you talk to, they have a different view, but I need to know the truth.
Sure.
What's the truth about divorce and remarriage, and where do we go from here?
Oh, well, I think the scriptures teach that divorce and remarriage is only acceptable to God under very certain circumstances, such as adultery or abandonment. That would be it. And then if you're not the offending party, then you're permitted to remarry. If you are the offending party, then you're not. I know that's hard teaching in our culture today, but that's what I think the scriptures teach. Josh, do you have anything different on that? Okay. So, I mean, it's a hard teaching, but it's because, see, one of the problems, let me back up. One of the reasons we have same-sex marriage in this country is because heterosexuals gave up on true marriage about 50 years ago. See, we've bought into the romance model of marriage, and that's why no-fault divorce laws came in. No-fault divorce laws started in about 1970 in California when a governor there signed it. You know who he was? Ronald Reagan. Yeah, the Ronald Reagan, who later regretted doing this, but he signed no-fault divorce laws, and it spread all the way across the country. And it bought into the idea that marriage is just about feelings, and once the feelings go away, then you should have a right to leave the person and find somebody else. This is the romance view of marriage. The true view of marriage is the fact that a man and woman come together to bring forth children and to perpetuate and stabilize society, and that God has ordained this. Yet we've abandoned that, and we think, if we feel out of love, we deserve somebody else. C.S. Lewis, who at this point had never been married, but wrote one of the most profound chapters on marriage anywhere, is in the book Mere Christianity. The book is called Christian Marriage, or the chapter is called Christian Marriage, in which he says that the idea that love is a feeling is not the true view of love. Love may be the explosion that started the relationship, but it's not the engine that keeps it going. This feeling. And think about this. When you meet somebody for the first time in a romantic way, you know how you feel infatuated with them for a short period of time? I mean, you can't think of anybody else. You can't do anything else. You're just thinking about this person all the time. And people think that's love. Well, if that's love, first of all, you couldn't promise to feel that way the rest of your life, right? You can't promise feelings. You can't get up on the altar and say, I promise to feel this way for the next 50 years. You might as well stand up there and say, I promise never to be hungry or never to be angry. You can't promise that. All you can promise is action. And you wouldn't want that feeling to last very long anyway. What would become of your career? What would become of your relationships? What would become of you? I mean, you'd be an idiot, right? Running around with your heart beating like a hummingbird all the time. I mean, you'd die. You couldn't last. It just starts the relationship. It doesn't keep it going. And so love is to seek what's best for the other person. As Paul says, love always perseveres. Love rejoices in the truth. Love always protects. It's not a feeling. You can't promise feelings. Okay. And we bought into the feelings. Well, if marriage is all about feelings, then why can't two people of the same sex have feelings for one another? And why don't we recognize that? If marriage has nothing to do with children, it just has to do with the romance of two individuals. Why would the government care if Mary likes Steve or Bill likes Ed? Why would the government care? The only reason the government's involved is to perpetuate and stabilize society, and only heterosexuals can do that. Sorry, that's just, oh, I forgot. You can be any sex you want now. I forgot that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Josh, why don't you close this out? Pastor Josh. All right, one more question. One more. Sorry, go ahead. One more. Yes,
My
sir.
name is Brian.
What, sorry?
Brian.
Brian, go ahead, sir.
I just lost my father-in-law recently.
Sorry to hear.
And he decided that it was time for him to go. He'd been in a wheelchair for 40 years. He had gotten pneumonia. He didn't want to go home and live on oxygen. And he wanted to give up. And they came and found him to be a sound mind and let him basically cut off the supply of oxygen and to let him go that way. I've thought about it more. Is it like a suicide attempt to give up your own life? And would you still go to heaven after you've given up your own life due to health or due to mental state of mind? Do you still go to heaven?
Yeah, I think so, Brian. The reason I'm saying that is because your manner of death does not determine your eternal destination. Your acceptance of the free gift of salvation does. I had a friend commit suicide 1.5 years ago. I used to do seminars with him. And he was just in a distraught sense. I mean, we all have ups and downs, right? We don't know what we would do in the same situation. And by the way, I wouldn't consider that a suicide. Why? Because they were using artificial means to keep him alive. No one is obliged to have artificial means keep them alive. My dad, who died last year, had a living will that said, you know, I don't want feeding tubes. I don't want artificial means to keep me alive. Thankfully, we didn't have to make that decision. He died naturally, but he had, had cancer, but he died. So it's not suicide to say, take away this oxygen tube or take away this thing, because I just want to go. You don't have to use artificial means to keep somebody alive. If they want to move on to the next life, they can do that. So in other words, they're just removing these artificial means. They're not taking steps to actively kill themselves. They're just removing the means that may keep them alive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Pastor Josh.
I just now have another 45-minute presentation. Thank you guys for coming and spending the evening with us. Thank you for all those that engaged in the questions. And there's probably more questions out there. I can't promise you that I'll answer them as effectively, but we as the church, we're here to discuss theology and make the gospel known and to continue that work always. And so just know that we're here for that. Tonight, there was a lot shared, and I think that Dr. Frank alluded to the idea that most of the time we don't see salvation happen in debate formats. But I would be remiss if I didn't give the opportunity tonight. We have a couple of leaders that are going to be in the room, and they're going to come right over to the sides here on either side of the auditorium. If you're a leader in the place and you're willing to pray, we would love the opportunity to pray with you if you want to accept Christ as your Lord and Savior tonight. I believe that would be the greatest decision to ever be made, and so I can't leave here without offering that. So we're going to do that. Also, there's some books out here. If there's not any left, I think that Dr. Frank said that you can sign up and you'll have that shipped to you. Something that he asks a lot, and I think is really important, is the question, if Christianity were true, would you be a Christian? If you're in the room tonight, you are not a believer in Christ, but you would answer that question with, if Christianity were true, I would be a Christian, and you don't have the money to afford the book. We're going to have, Adam is going to be right up here in the front, Cody is going to be over here. I want to, on behalf of the church, we will buy that book for you if you will read it. We want to make that a resource for you. And so, and as well as Holly, if you are in that camp and you want the book and you just don't have the finances tonight, whatever, come and talk to them. We will make sure to get that book ordered for you, and we'll pay for that. But thank you guys again for coming out tonight. If you don't mind, I'd like to say a word of prayer as we dismiss tonight. Jesus, we thank you for who you are, God. I thank you for the presentation tonight that laid out what I believe to be evidence that not only is there a God, but Jesus, that your name is the name above all names. And Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I pray that any seed that was planted, Lord, that would be watered and that there would be salvation that happens as a result of what happened tonight. For all the believers in the room, I pray that they are encouraged in their faith tonight. I pray that they leave this place equipped to go forth and to share the gospel with confidence with friends and family in their life. May we be bold enough to share and plant seed anywhere that we can, Father. We thank you for who you are. We love you. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Thank you guys again for coming out tonight. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.